You watch him from across the room, silent, still, unseen, yet profoundly felt. His eyes trace your every move, but you don't utter a single word. Not because you're indifferent, quite the opposite. You hold a power that transcends speech, a presence that unsettles without noise. In this world obsessed with sound, with constant chatter and desperate confessions, you embody the terrifying art of silence. How does one outsmart men without saying a word? Is it a game of dominance? Of hidden will? Nietzsche once wrote, "The surest way to corrupt a youth is to instruct him to hold in higher esteem those who think alike than those who think differently." You are the anomaly, the one who refuses to play by the herd script. You wield silence like a blade, cutting through the fog of shallow desires and false displays. Modern masculinity is drowning in noise, desperate texts, performative bravado, endless explanations. But what if real power isn't spoken? What if it is held in the spaces between words, in the unspoken challenge that reverberates deeper than any argument? Freud would remind us that beneath every interaction lies a vast ocean of unconscious desires and repressions, where silence is the dark current pulling men under. Tonight you become a mystery wrapped in shadow, an enigma that provokes, confounds, and conquers without uttering a sound. This is not mere coyness. This is mastery. This is the quiet dominance that breaks men down and builds empires inside their minds. Prepare yourself. We will journey through the tangled labyrinth of power, desire, and identity, guided by the sharpest minds of philosophy and psychology. By the end, you will understand why silence can be the deadliest weapon, and how to wield it with ruthless precision. Silence is not absence, it is presence. A force more visceral than speech, more profound than noise. To outsmart men without uttering a word is to wield silence as Nietzsche's will to power incarnata, quiet but unrelenting. Assertion of mastery that unsettles the very ground beneath the loud and the brash. Nietzsche said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." In other words, men who lack self-mastery will always be puppets of external forces, social expectations, emotional dependence, or shallow desires. The man who speaks constantly is often the one who fears the emptiness that silence exposes. He fills the void with words to mask his insecurity, to control the narrative, to avoid facing his own fractures. Yet it is in the refusal to speak that the true master reveals his sovereignty. Consider the man who watches you without comment, his gaze sharp, his silence oppressive. You might mistake this for weakness, for passivity, but it is anything but. Freud understood that beneath every conscious interaction lies a subterranean sea of unconscious drives, desire, and repression locked in eternal combat. The unspoken words carry more weight than the spoken ones because they trigger what the conscious mind tries to suppress. When you say nothing, you become the shadow in his psyche, the unsolvable puzzle, the forbidden truth that unsettles his unconscious. He struggles not just with your silence, but with his own inability to decode it. Michel Foucault's insights deepen this understanding. Power is not held only in commands or speech. It is diffused in the subtle relations between bodies, gazes, and silences. Foucault observed, "Where there is power, there is resistance. Silence can be both an act of resistance and a form of power." By refusing to engage in the usual power games, arguments, explanations, emotional outbursts, you disrupt the very mechanisms through which men assert control. Your silence forces him to confront himself. It becomes a mirror reflecting his own desires, fears, and limits back at him. Imagine a man in a crowded bar, trying to impress with loud words and exaggerated gestures. You stand quietly, detached, your gaze meeting his only briefly, a faint smirk playing on your lips. Each word he speaks is swallowed by your silence, making him smaller, more frantic. He searches for validation, craving your reaction like a drug. But you give nothing. You become the void that consumes his performance. The silence is not emptiness. It is a battlefield where the war of wills is waged without a single shot fired. The ability to outsmart men without speaking demands a mastery of yourself first. It requires understanding that words often betray more weakness than strength, that power lies in self-command, and that true influence is exercised not by forcing others to listen, but by commanding their attention without utterance. So, what happens when silence meets noise? When the quiet will of one confronts the desperate clamoring of many? Nietzsche's will to power teaches us that mastery is self-overcoming, the relentless refusal to be shaped by the herd, the noise, the trivialities. You become the anomaly, the unexpected force that breaks patterns and rewrites rules. The silent gaze, the unspoken presence becomes the ultimate challenge to masculine ego, forcing men to reckon with a power they cannot grasp or contain. This is the paradox. To outsmart men without saying a word, you must become both invisible and invincible. You must be the silence that speaks louder than any scream, the calm that shatters storms, the dark presence that no man can ignore. To wield silence as power is to understand the tangled dance of desire beneath every interaction. Nietzsche's will to power is not merely domination by force. It is the subtle art of shaping reality through one's presence. Desire, in this sense, is not a mere craving, but an expression of life's creative force, an urge to surpass, to transform, to overcome. But when desire is stifled or misdirected, it becomes a source of weakness, of submission masked as passion. George's Bataille brings us closer to the shadowy edges of desire, exposing its raw, often forbidden nature. He writes, eroticism is assenting to life, even in death. It is a paradox where the transgression of limits, the brush with the taboo, reveals the most intense forms of vitality. In silence, desire can be a potent transgression. It refuses to be tamed by words, escaping control and classification. The silent power that outsmarts men taps into this erotic force, never explicit, always suggestive, like a charged silence pregnant with meaning, challenging the boundaries of speech and social norms. Imagine a woman in a social gathering who does not laugh at every joke, does not respond eagerly to flattery. Instead, her quiet presence exudes an intoxicating tension. Men find themselves drawn not by what she says, but by what she withholds. Bataille's notion of eroticism here is embodied in this withholding, the refusal to surrender to the expected roles, the refusal to perform the scripted dance of desire. The silent refusal is the greatest seduction, the ultimate test of power. But what of gender? Simone de Beauvoir's existential analysis of the other reveals the complex dynamics that underlie this silent power. She famously said, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." The roles assigned by society create a division between the self and the other, often trapping women in positions of dependency and objectification. However, silence can subvert this dynamic. By withholding speech, by not fulfilling the expected responses, a woman reclaims agency. She refuses the role of the other that society demands and instead becomes an autonomous subject, an enigma impossible to fully grasp or possess. Consider the man who expects submission, who demands constant validation and explanation. When met with silence, he faces the collapse of his framework of control. His identity, often built on dominance and possession, shatters because silence is resistance. It denies him the power of the gaze and the narrative. It forces him to confront the void of his own desires and the limitations of his power. Nietzsche's Overman is precisely this figure who transcends social roles and herd. Morality, To outsmart men without words is to embody a fragment of this ideal, moving beyond the need to justify or explain, beyond the chains of emotional bargaining. The silent power is the power of self-mastery, of presence that commands without pleading, that entices without promising. Yet this path is not without peril. The tension between silence and desire is a battlefield where vulnerability lurks. Pataya's transgression is always a flirtation with the abyss between life and death. Control and surrender. A silence that outsmarts can also isolate. The refusal to speak and become a barrier as impenetrable as a wall. But in this risk lies the ultimate truth. Mastery demands sacrifice. To remain silent in a world hungry for noise is to reject the easy comforts of social belonging and emotional bargaining. It is to embrace the power that comes from within, from the refusal to be consumed by others' demands. As Beauvoir taught, true freedom comes from becoming the subject, not the object. Silence becomes the weapon and shield in this quest for sovereignty. You stand at the edge, the precipice of silence, where the unbearable weight of your own desires and fears threatens to break you. Freud whispers from the shadows, reminding you that beneath the surface of your stoic facade lies a churning sea of repressed urges and unconscious drives. Where ID was, there ego shall be, he said, urging the emergence of self-awareness from the murky depths of repression. Yet, what happens when repression fractures under pressure? When silence, once your armor, becomes a prison? This breaking point is not merely personal. It is a battleground where societal power relations clash with your inner world. Michel Foucault's insight pierces through the noise. Power is not simply wielded from above, but is diffuse, pervasive, inscribed in every gaze, every word, every silence. Power disciplines and constructs you even as you seek to master it. The silence that once shielded you now becomes a form of surveillance, a self-imposed discipline fraught with tension. Imagine a man haunted by his failures, addicted to the approval of others, caught in the relentless cycle of performing masculinity. His silence is not strength but a suffocating void where the gaze of the other looms like a phantom. He is both watcher and watched, trapped in the panopticon of his own making. The very desire to outsmart others without speaking becomes an obsession, a toxic game where every silence is loaded with expectation and dread. Pataya's vision of transgression reveals the abyss waiting beneath this tension. The erotic is repetition in the form of loss and death. To confront your desires without surrendering means flirting with self-annihilation. The silence that outsmarts men is a tightrope walk over an abyss. One misstep and you fall into despair, loneliness, or emotional numbness. In this collapse, there is a revelation. The fractured ego glimpses the truth. Mastery is not the absence of desire, but its transformation. It is not silence as denial, but silence as a crucible for rebirth. The man who loses himself in love, in need, or in validation is shackled by the herd morality Nietzsche warned against. He is prey to the reactive, to the passive, to the endless echo of others' demands, but from the ruins rises a faint spark. The abyss stares back, and in its gaze, you see the possibility of freedom. Foucault's notion of power as relational means you can reconfigure your bonds, rewrite the scripts. You can refuse the internalized surveillance, refuse the compulsive performance, and reclaim your body and voice on your terms. This is the moment where silence turns from a prison to a throne. The breaking man begins to gather the shards of his shattered self, not to mend the old mask, but to forge a new identity, one that embraces desire as a force for self-overcoming rather than self-destruction. The revelation is brutal and beautiful. To outsmart men without saying a word, you must first outsmart yourself, your fears, your cravings, your need for approval. Only then can silence become sovereignty. You are no longer the man shattered by silence, but the man who commands it. Nietzsche's words echo in your mind. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. The why is no longer found in the validation of others or the fragile illusions of love that bind you. It is found in your own will to power, not the domination of others, but the mastery of yourself. The Bermensch does not plead, does not explain, does not seek approval. He creates his values, erects his throne in the quiet shadows. In this sovereign silence, there is a profound detachment, not cold indifference, but a calm strength that cannot be shaken. You watch the world spin its illusions, the desperate cries for attention and approval, the desperate dance of power plays, and you remain still, unmoved. This is not weakness, but the greatest power, the refusal to participate in the spectacle of validation. Simone de Beauvoir's insight into the gaze of the other reminds you of the subtle tyranny that haunts all relationships. One is not born, but rather becomes a woman. She wrote, a truth equally applicable to all gendered identities, including masculinity. The gaze, the other's expectations, the roles imposed on you, these shape you only if you allow them. Sovereignty is the refusal to be the other's object, the refusal to lose yourself in their eyes. You understand now that to outsmart men without saying a word is not a game of manipulation or silence as weapon. It is the silent declaration of self-possession, the embodied knowledge that your worth is not granted but claimed. This power is quiet but seismic. It shifts the very ground beneath the social theater. The story of the man who once craved approval is now one of rebirth. He moves through the world with a silent confidence that unsettles others. He does not need to prove or perform because he knows the value of his own presence. His silence is not emptiness, but a statement, a fortress built from the ruins of reactive identity. The path ahead is not easy. The world resists sovereignty with noise, distractions, and false freedoms, the illusions Herbert Marcuse described as repressive disublimation. Yet you walk through this resistance, carving out space for true freedom, for a life where desire is not repression, but a source of creative power. In the silence, you discover freedom, freedom from the herd, from emotional chaos, from the endless need to be seen. You embody Nietzsche's will to power and Beauvoir's existential freedom, standing as a man who no longer loses himself in love or validation, but commands his own fate. The message is clear and cold. The strongest weapon is the silence of a man who knows himself. To outsmart men without saying a word, become that man. Become the force they cannot break, the silence they cannot penetrate. If this message stirred something raw inside you, a flicker of truth buried beneath the noise, don't let it fade into the void. This is not just a video. It's a summons to reclaim your sovereignty, to master the silence that separates the weak from the unbreakable. Like, share, and subscribe to join this generation of men who no longer beg to be seen, who refuse to explain or apologize for their existence. Support the work through the link below, because every voice that rises strengthens the movement. We are building a brotherhood of men who walk in shadows, not to hide, but to wield desire with power and thought with fierce clarity. If you are one of them, I'll see you in the next video.